Hi everyone, Christos Anisti. I hope you can see the screen. Okay, so
Yes.
today, yeah, thank you. So today we want to contemplate about this verse from Romans. It's a quite well-known verse that we all heard before. The verse says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." So this verse is telling us that we need to be constantly changing and constantly transformed. And this, of course, goes with the fact that we are a new creation. And that's what we're celebrating, of course, in these days. And this is a call, in fact, for sanctification, because it's through this transformation, by us being transformed, that we get sanctified. So we can think, for example, of Christ when he was on the mountain of transfiguration, اللي هو جبل التجلي. You know that his face shone like the sun, and people could see his nature, the glorified nature of God. But for Christ, of course, this is his own nature, it's just being revealed. But for us, things are different. We need to be transformed, like St. Paul says, by the renewing of our mind. But the question is, what do we want to change to? And suppose that I'm good. I mean, if I'm good, why do I need to be transformed? So, of course, to answer this, if you look at the second verse, look at what St. Paul says in Galatians. He says, "My little children, for whom I labor in birth again, until Christ is formed in you." So this is really the goal of our transformation. The goal of our transformation is not just to replace the works of the flesh, for example, that we used to live in with some good morals or some good virtues or things that we, a better behavior, for example. But St. Paul is telling us exactly what we need to be, being a new creation. He's saying that we need to be transformed until Christ is formed in us. And of course, this is a big thing, because if you look in Ephesians, I mean, the question, of course, like we were saying, suppose that I'm going to be transformed. Is there a limit to how much I can be transformed? Like we were saying, suppose that I feel that I'm good or I am good. Of course, there's nothing called good when it comes to having Christ being formed in me, because the limit is infinite. When we're talking about Christ being formed in us, St. Paul explains it in Ephesians, where he says, "To the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." اللي هي يعني بالعربي إلى إنسان كامل إلى قياس ملء المسيح، يعني قياس قامة ملء المسيح. Which is, of course, something that we can spend all our life. Even our life is, of course, not going to be sufficient, but that's essentially what St. Paul is telling us to do. In fact, if you try to read now these verses together, the parts that are highlighted in yellow, it says, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind until Christ is formed in you, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ," which is, of course, a very big deal, to be transformed to the level of Christ being formed in us, like he's saying. And so that's what we want to contemplate about, that change that we need to go through and the transformation that we constantly need to be going through, which is, as we said, is a call for sanctification. Change is never easy. If you remember, Abuna Shnuda was once telling us about the fact that when we're trying to change, essentially we're going to feel a little bit uncomfortable, because we're doing something that is unusual, something that we have not done. We're essentially leaving our comfort zone. And that's what we talked about earlier, is that to be transformed, one needs to do some kind of self-denial. We have to go against our will, because my will is telling me to do something, and then I'm trying to do something else. So that, of course, involves carrying the cross. It means that if I was doing things in a certain way, I'm going to be doing things in a different way. Actually, I was reminded, I was doing a homework with my daughter, and I was reminded of the metamorphosis that happens to, for example, the life cycle of a butterfly or something. You see through this process how they shed the old outer shape, and then they become something totally new, which is similar to what we talk about when we take the old man and then we wear the new man. That's the type of renewal that St. Paul is talking about. So of course, the quiet time that we have, the retreat that we take, is a good opportunity for us to examine ourselves and see where exactly is that I fall short. It's an opportunity for us to be transformed. Because sometimes one of the things that could be happening in our lives, I could be saying, for example, my kids are the problem. Maybe my husband is the problem. Maybe my spouse is the problem. They are the ones that need to change. They need to start doing things in a different way. But we need to remember that there is an important fact that we want to agree upon, is that I'm not going to be able to change anyone other than myself. It's true that the people around me, everybody around me, everyone has their weaknesses and they also need to change, but I simply cannot change anyone. The only thing I can do is to work with God, of course, because it's God who's going to change me. I can only work with God, the spirit that lives within me, on changing myself. And that's the process of sanctification that we're talking about. And of course, after I change, and that's the good thing, is that after I change, I will be in a better position to assist others. So in changing myself, I may be able to assist others if they decide to go on the same path of sanctification. But what concerns me, or what really matters to me, and I think that could be a solution to many of our problems, is that sometimes we focus too much on the weaknesses of the people outside of us and we want them to be transformed. And they do need to be transformed. But like we said, I cannot change anyone, and I also need to be transformed. So I need to keep working on myself. And that's why I was telling you at the beginning that if I'm thinking that I'm good enough, well, even if somebody is good, has he reached the state where Christ is formed in him? And if he reached the case where Christ is formed in him, we're talking here about the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, like we were saying in Ephesians. So it's a long process, and one needs to keep working on it. And like we said, as I change, I can help others change. Like it says that if you know when it says that the yeast can leaven the whole dough. So if you have a large amount of flour or something, and then you put a small piece of yeast, that is going to change the entire dough or leaven the entire dough. And that's exactly what happens with us. If we get transformed, then other people, as we said, we're going to be in a better position to help others if they want to be transformed themselves. And we've seen Christ doing that. Christ started with the disciples. You've seen these disciples, they were the yeast. And then he sent them into the world. And of course, they have changed the entire world by the preaching and by the good news that they have brought to everyone. And St. Paul is telling us here that to be transformed, we need to renew our mind, the renewing of your mind. And of course, the renewing of the mind means the mindset. Our mindset has to change. Our inner being has to change. And of course, this is not referring to acquiring more education or having more information, because you probably have seen lots of people that have less education. Sometimes they have an inner enlightenment. So it's not really directly correlated with education, but they could have a mindset and an attitude towards matters and towards how they live, how they view things, how they look at things, how they think about things, which is driven by the spirit that dwells in them. يعني زي ما بنقول بالعربي يعني بيحكموا بحسب الروح. So of course, what I'm saying is not a call for us that we don't learn, but it's just saying that even if we approach knowledge, even if we approach trying to learn about God, the goal is not just to gain information about God, but of course the goal is that spiritual enlightenment by which we can be transformed. The goal is to know God better, is to approach him, of course, with humility, and eventually to be like the blind man who said, I was blind, but now I see. So that's the meaning that we want to contemplate about today. If you look also at the verse from St. Peter's, he says a very beautiful verse, which is also related to this. He says, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. Here is the mind needs to be sober. The mind needs to be changed. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lusts, which is similar to the part when we're saying not to be conformed to the world. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lusts, as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy, for I am holy. So like we said, this is a call for sanctification. St. Peter is telling us the exact same point that St. Paul has mentioned. He's saying that the former lusts and these evil desires that could be life-ruining to us, these things could be destroying our life in Christ. And of course, it's coming from the deceit of our minds. And that's why he's saying, therefore, gird up the loins of your mind. And St. Paul says a very beautiful verse also in Ephesians. And actually, he gets here in this verse, he gets to the bottom of the problem. He says, you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. So he's telling us that the main problem that is stopping us from that renewal of the mind, from being transformed, is that sometimes we have a hardness of heart. It is this hardness of heart that's the root cause, or that's the deepest disease that sometimes affects us or infects everything else around it. So to be able to reach that liberating truth, we need to work on that part, which is getting rid of that hardness of the heart. So the contemplation that we want to, again, just in summary, what we want to think about today is this idea of change. We need to be constantly transformed or changed to acquire the characteristics of this new creation. And the focus should not be on changing others, but rather on changing myself. And as we said, when I manage to change myself and change the bad things about me, I may be in a better position to start helping others also be sanctified, knowing that the others also, of course, need to be sanctified, but it's not my job. My job is mostly to focus on myself. طيب نقول التأمل ده برضو بسرعة كده بالعربي. الآية بتاعتنا من روميا هي آية مشهورة قوي، اللي هي بتاعت لا تشكلوا هذا الدهر بل تغيروا عن شكلكم بتجديد أذهانكم لتختبروا ما هي إرادة الله الصالحة. يعني هو بيدعونا يعني بولس الرسول بيقول لنا ان احنا محتاجين ان احنا نكون دايما بنتغير، دايما يكون في عملية التحول دي. وطبعا موضوع التحول ده، يعني الواحد ممكن يقول طب انا عايز اغير ايه بالظبط، يعني ايه الحاجة انا شايف مثلا نفسي كويس، بس احنا في حاجات كتير قوي عايزة تتغير نتيجة ان احنا التغير بتاعنا مش هدفه ان انا يبقى عندي اخلاق مثلا احسن. طبعا دي حاجة كويسة، لكن في ناس كتير في العالم اخلاقها احسن، اخلاقها كويسة. يعني مش الهدف ان انا يبقى لي behavior كويس او اخلاقي تكون كويسه، الهدف ان انا اوصل للمستوى ده اللي بيتكلم عنه بولس الرسول، اللي هو بيقول يعني الى ان يتصور المسيح فيكم. يعني لو بصينا كده على العالم، يبقى العالم فيه اكتر، يعني يبقى ابتدى بالمسيح، وبعد كده بقى فيه مسحاء بقى كتير في العالم اللي هم احنا يعني. وطبعا عشان الواحد يوصل للمستوى بتاع ان هو يبقى على صورة المسيح، او ان المسيح يتصور فيه، ده مشوار كبير. يعني رحلة العمر كلها مش هتكفي. يعني زي ما قلنا، اللي هي يعني الواحد يوصل الى انسان كامل الى قياس قامة ملء المسيح. ودي طبعا قامة ممكن الواحد يفضل يكبر فيها forever، لان يعني المسيح infinite. فالنقطة اللي كنا بنتكلم فيها ان يعني التغير ده عمره ما بيكون حاجة سهلة، ان الواحد يتحول او يتغير، يبقى يعني في خصائص الخليقة الجديدة. وطبعا التغير ده يعني بيشمل كل حاجة. يعني مثلا الفكر، يعني بولس الرسول بيقول أما نحن فلنا فكر المسيح. يعني الواحد بيفكر في الأمور بشكل مختلف. أفتكر مثلا أبونا لوقا كان دايما يحب يتكلم عن مثلا نقطة المحبة. يعني بيقول هل إحنا مثلا محبتنا زي محبة العالم كلها محبة مجاملات؟ يعني أنا مثلا أما بحب حد مجرد عشان أجامل الناس اللي جاملتني، أو بجاملهم في ظروف معينة، وممكن برضو مثلا أعمل للناس زي ما هم بيعملوا لي. يعني ده يبقى فكر العالم. لكن هو يعني بولس الرسول بيقول لنا ان احنا المفروض نتغير عن شكلنا بتجديد اذهاننا، لان احنا خليقه جديده، خليقه جديده في المسيح، الى ان يتصور المسيح فيكم. وعلى فكره هو ده هدف الخدمه. يعني حتى الخدمه نفسها، يعني اي حد بيخدم في الكنيسه هو هدفه في الاخر ان المسيح يعني يتصور في الناس اللي هو بيخدمهم دول. يعني طبعا يعني يبتدي بنفسه الاول، وفي نفس الوقت هو هدفه زي ما بولس يعني الرسول في الايه دي كان بيقول يا اولادي الذين اتمخض بكم ايضا الى ان يتصور المسيح فيكم. يعني هو كل شغله هدفه في الاخر ان المسيح يتصور، يعني يبقى صورته موجوده، الايمج بتاعت كرايست تبقى بالظبط هي اللي موجوده في الناس اللي هو بيخدمهم. فيعني كنا بنقول ان التغيير ده عمره ما بيكون سهل، لان معناه ان الواحد يعني المفروض يخرج من نطاق الحته اللي هو بيبقى مستريح فيها، الكومفورت زون. محتاجه انكار ذات، محتاجه ان الواحد يحمل الصليب، لان يعني هي عباره عن خلع الانسان العتيق ولبس الانسان الجديد، ودي عمليه ما بتبقاش سهله، ومحتاجه طبعا يعني العمليه دي ما يقدرش الانسان يعملها بنفسه. ده هو بيشتغل مع ربنا، هو الروح القدس طبعا هو اللي بيغير الانسان لانه ساكن فينا، بس الانسان بيشتغل مع الروح ان هو يتغير. يعني فتره الخلوه دي يعني بتبقى فرصه كويسه ان احنا نبص ايه الحاجات اللي احنا محتاجين ان احنا تتغير فينا، والهدف من التغيير ان احنا نوصل للمستوى ده بتاع until Christ is formed in us، يعني يتصور فينا المسيح كله انسان كامل. في نقطة برضو كنا اتكلمنا عنها دلوقتي، اللي هي حتة ان الواحد، يعني احنا كتير بنبص للناس اللي حوالينا، انا عايز اغير الناس اللي حواليا لان شايف فيهم عيوب، وهو فعلا الناس اللي حوالينا فيهم عيوب، يعني لان ما فيش اي حد ما فيهوش ضعفات وما فيهوش عيوب، لكن النقطة المهمة ان انا الحاجة الوحيدة اللي انا المفروض اركز عليها، وده اللي بيقوله لنا بولس الرسول، ان احنا يعني نركز على نفسنا. كل واحد يركز على انا ممكن اتغير ازاي، مش يركز على ازاي الاخر يتغير. يعني هي دعوة للقداسة. فلو انا اتغيرت انا برضو هقدر ان انا يعني لو انا نجحت في الموضوع ده طبعا بعمل الروح القدس النعمة اللي جوايا، هبقى في بوزيشن احسن ان انا لو حد تاني عايز يتغير ممكن ان انا اساعده في عملية التغيير دي. يعني زي ما بيقولوا خميرة صغيرة تخمر العجين كله. لما السيد المسيح أرسل التلاميذ والرسل، هو ابتدى بالخميرة الصغيرة دي، والخميرة دي يعني بلغت أصواتهم إلى كل المسكونة وأقطار الأرض كلها، وغيروا العالم كله، رغم إن هم كانوا خميرة صغيرة قوي. يعني لو واحد بص عليهم يعني يشوف إن دي حاجة صغيرة ما ينفعش إن هي تغير كتير، لكن ده حصل نتيجة إن هم نفسهم اتغيروا. يعني لو شفنا التلاميذ قبل القيامة وبعد القيامة كان فرق كبير. هو أخذ الخميرة دي، يعني أخذ الخميرة الصغيرة، وهم نفسهم اتغيروا. لما هم تغيروا يعني بتجديد أذهانهم، بقى كل حاجة بالنسبة لهم بعد كده اختلفت. يعني زي ما بنقول إن هم يعني بقوا بيحكموا بقى بحسب الروح، النظرة للأمور بقت مختلفة، الفكر بقى مختلف، طريقة المحبة في اتجاه الناس بقت مختلفة. آه الآية الجميلة حتى اللي بيقولها هنا بطرس بتتكلم برضو عن الفكر بتاعنا. يعني بيقول منطقوا أحقاء ذهنكم صاحين. صاحين يعني سوبر، يعني واحد مش سكران. لا تشاكلوا شهواتكم السابقة في جهالتكم، بل نظير القدوس الذي دعاكم كونوا أنتم أيضا قديسين. نظير القدوس يعني زي القدوس، يعني اللي هي بالإنجليزي you also be holy in all conduct as he who called you is holy. كونوا أنتم أيضا قديسين في كل سيرة. وفي نقطة حلوة بيقولها بولس الرسول في أفسس، بيقول لا تسلكوا فيما بعد كما يسلك سائر الأمم أيضا ببطل ذهنهم in the futility of their minds. وبيقول إن سبب بطل ذهنهم ده، أو سبب إن يعني الفكر بقى مضلم، سببه هو غلاظة القلوب اللي هي الهاردنس اوف هارت. فيعني ربنا يدينا ان احنا يعني نركز يعني فترة التأمل دي على حتة ان احنا محتاجين دايما نكون constantly being transformed. انا طبعا مش بوعظ حد، يعني دي انا مجرد بحط قدامكم يعني الحاجة what lies ahead of us، دي الحاجة اللي احنا محتاجين كلنا نشتغل عليها. حتة اللي تغيروا عن شكلكم بتجديد أذهانكم إلى أن يتصور المسيح فيكم، لحد ما الواحد يوصل إلى إنسان كامل إلى قياس قامة ملء المسيح. لإلهنا المجد دائما أبديا، آمين.